Yes.
Hello, world.
Okay, my friend, we can actually listen to you for a long time, but let's officially start, okay? So first and foremost, to all of you, welcome, good evening. I'm Gadi Levy. I'm the Executive Director of the Streicker Center, and I'm honored that over 6,000 of you signed up for tonight's program to meet the amazing team of the new Netflix series, Stateless, who are shining a spotlight on an issue central to our traditions. Over the past 4 months, Netflix has saved our collective sanity by providing us endless opportunities to escape and to stay engaged. The Streicker Center has been proud to feature many of the programs, from Somebody Feed Phil to Stiteless to Unorthodox, and we hope to continue doing so. Tonight, in our 70th virtual program, we turn to a series that is both disturbing and enlightening. While we are all well aware of the flight of refugees in America, Stateless reminds us that sadly this nation is hardly alone in mistreating the women, men, and children fleeing danger, and even a country like Australia does not deal with them compassionately. By focusing on a small group of characters, both refugees and the staff at the Australian camp when they are housed, it helps us understand in a profound way what the world's treatment of refugees means, not just for their safety, but for the sense of self, for the lives of individuals who are their guards, and for what and who the world values. Before we meet the guest who will take us inside that reality, I would like to thank Sunrise East 56 for the sponsorship of our July virtual celebrations and for their commitment to building a community on the Upper East Side. A special appreciation to the amazing Maya Brooks of Netflix, who helped us put together tonight's program. And of course, to our moderator. This is the first time that the funny, engaging, and talented Jessica Shah, the host of EW Live on Sirius XM Stars channel, is participating in the Streicker Center event, and I trust it will not be the last. Jessica, thank you for everything. Let's do it.
Thank you so much, Gadi. I'm so honored to be here. My name is Jessica Shaw. I host EW Live on Sirius XM. I've been lucky enough to interview some people on the panel today. I'm so honored to be here to talk about Stateless, which, like Gadi said, is airing now on Netflix. I've just been looking at some of the comments, and it's so incredible. There are so many people from all over the world who have logged into this, and so many of you are already writing about the performances and the writing and just everything about the show and how moving it was. I watch a lot of TV for my job and for my life, and we all do. And even if we didn't 4 months ago, we certainly do now. Every so often, I am privileged enough to see a show that is so powerful and resonant that I'm thinking about it long, long after the credits have rolled. Stateless is of course the story of lives that intersect at a detention center in Australia, whether seeking asylum, whether they're by mistake, or whether employed by the detention center as a guard. I am going to welcome my wonderful globe-trotting panel from literally 3 continents. I'm so excited. But first, let's show a trailer of Stateless.
What is it that you want?
I want to be loved.
Here you can be anyone you want to be.
Sophie's missing. I wondered if you'd heard from her.
She just stopped coming here. Such a shame.
In the vast majority of cases, those people who are missing choose to remain missing because they're running from something.
Excuse me, I don't belong here.
No, you don't.
Australia's detention regime is a reflection of our highly developed migration system, enabling us to determine both the identity of asylum seekers and the legitimacy of their claims for protection.
You are all starting a
new life. You cannot hold on to the past.
Please, it's been a mistake. I'm not a criminal.
There are places like this all over Australia. Why? Because we are terrorists.
Can you confirm that an Australian citizen has been illegally detained in Barton?
People will be very interested in you. They will want to know why someone who looks just like them trapped in a place like this.
She's been missing for weeks and you're telling me you've got nothing?
You think this group had something to do with your sister's disappearance?
It isn't safe to say who I really am.
People are dying. Families are being destroyed.
That was the one chance that they had to be a family. You took that from them.
I'm a father, a man of faith.
Why can't you see that when you look at me?
She doesn't know what we are capable of. You cannot put a lid over a pot that's already boiling.
I don't belong here.
You're stuck here unless you tell me who you really are.
I think they've done something to my sister.
If I were you, I would run, because if I ever lay eyes on you again, I'll destroy you.
The world should know what they are doing to us here. Soon they will.
I want to be loved.
It's an extraordinary show. I am so incredibly honored to be here with this panel. I will intro them in a second, but first, so many of you are already writing your questions in. Definitely write it in the chat. Wonderful team of Erica and Ari will be collecting the questions, and I'll throw in questions. I know so many of you have thoughts you want to share, and I will throw that in with my questions. Around the world, we're just going to go alphabetically. Let's start. I want to welcome Tony Ayers, executive producer. Fayssal Bazzi, one of the stars, plays Damir. You guys are incredible. Cate Blanchett, producer and creator. I think she might also be an actress. I'm not really sure.
I was once. Yeah, I was once.
Jai Courtney, incredible, plays Cam in the series. Elise McCredie, also co-creator. We'll talk about a little kitchen meeting in a moment. And the wonderful Yvonne Strahovski, of course, who plays Sophie in the show. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm just going to say forgive us in advance if there are any Zoom issues. And also just to give this incredible lineup some props. There are people here from Australia, the UK, and the United States. So that is technology. It's good. Okay, so I wanted to start with Cate and Elise because I understand the idea for this show began in Kate's
the womb. In the womb.
Yeah, well, right, of course. But also, like, possibly over coffee. Can you set the stage for us how this started?
Elise?
Oh, well, Cate and I, we go back a long way. We went to high school together and university together. So we have a long history, and we were, I think it was around 2015, having coffee, breakfast, very long brunch in her home in Sydney. And we were just talking generally about working together. It had been a long time since we'd done a play at La Mama in Melbourne together, so we hadn't worked together for a long time. And we just started throwing ideas around, and something we both felt really passionate. At that time, Australia had started to send anyone arriving by boat to Manus or Nauru, and they were being told they would never settle in Australia if you came by boat. So that was a kind of starting point of how did that happen. And Cate can pick this up, but really it was sort of how did we get here was the start of our conversation, and that led us to looking, I guess, backwards, but in a Brechtian way to, what is a story we could tell about how we got here as a nation?
Yeah, I think sometimes, when things are off the national conversation, as Australia's treatment of asylum seekers and refugees was at that particular point in time, still is really, it's too hot to deal with the subject matter directly. So sometimes when you set things back in a period of recent history, there's a way where you can scaffold a more fear-based, a non-fear-based conversation around those issues. Because, of course, in the time that we were discussing it, and I think even more so now, not only in Australia but internationally, there's so much the notion of the global displacement crisis has been so politicized, like masks. have been so politicized, so it's how do you get back to the value of drama, which is connecting to the human face behind those figures. Forget politics. Who are the people? And I think that's what we tried to seed into the DNA of the series.
Absolutely. I'm curious to know about that. But first, I have to ask you, what's the most trouble the two of you got in high school?
I loved Elise. She was a year ahead of me at school. And we used to have these competitive drama. Each house at school would present a play. And Elise got up there and she said, bitch. And I thought, this girl had just claimed the word bitch. I thought, I want to know her. I want some of that.
And then you wouldn't audition for the school play, which I was directing.
I know, and you pulled me aside.
Devastated.
You were so offended. And I said, I'm scared of you. I said, I can't. You would never cast me. You said, I'm so offended. You have to direct the school play. And really, I think Elise McCredie is responsible for my career, for better or for worse. So
I'm quoting you on that. I did know secretly from uni, though, Jessica, that Cate could sing, because there are a few plays she did at university where she sang and she had this beautiful voice. And I remember when we were developing the character of Pat, I thought, okay, she's going to sing in this because no one knows.
I'm going to embarrass her, not only just on a national scale, but on an international scale.
Yeah, that's right.
That sounds like some major high school payback.
Yeah.
Tony, tell me a little bit about how you decided to tell these stories about these characters, because certainly, as the show says, there are 70 million displaced people in the world. And how did
80
million, I'm sorry. And how did you decide on these stories?
They sort of, and Tony and Cate, feel free to jump in, they sort of bounced out of the research, really. Once Cate and I made the decision that we were going to, and brought Tony, of course, into it, and we all made this decision that we were going to set the show in the early 2000s, we did an enormous amount of research over many years while we were trying to get the show up. But also that was incredibly valuable because characters popped up through that research. Obviously, the true story of the German-Australian air hostess, but there were also the guard stories, of course, many, many, many refugees and people who had been through those desert detention camps. So in a way, the series over, particularly the first year, the characters kind of popped their heads out and went, this is a story. And when the three of us got together with the writer Belinda Checo, it became clearer and clearer which characters we needed to tell. And we were very clear that we wanted multiple perspectives very early.
I wanted to talk about, I'm sorry, Tony, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I mean, we were very clear from the beginning that we wanted to analyse a system, and so we chose points in the system which we thought constituted its structure, and we wanted to get away from the idea that it was all about any individual, that we were trying to talk about how do these systems operate.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I wanted to talk about the casting because it is truly extraordinary. I'm so happy that so many of you are here. I guess for Jai and Yvonne and Fayssal, is this the kind of thing that like your phone rings and you see Cate's number and you're like, yes, I'll do it. I'll do the job.
Pretty much.
Kate Winslet. I'll work with her in a heartbeat. I loved her in Titanic.
Kate Winslet. Well, I'll jump in. I don't know. I mean, as tends to happen, a call came through, and kind of just gauging a bit of interest and stuff. And obviously, when I learned who was involved, I was immediately drawn to it, and I had the chance to read a couple of scripts before, kind of, like getting fully kind of on board. And I think Yvonne was attached at that point. And had been for some time, and I don't know, it just sounded fascinating. I loved what these guys were setting out to do with the characters, and no sort of thread felt functional or underexplored, and I guess if there was any like caution. I felt like without reading anything, playing a guard, I wondered if perhaps that was something that might be lent into a little too strongly. But it was really refreshing and exciting to see the character of Cam kind of have such a dramatic arc and have so much distance to kind of go. And I mean, I was like like Flynn for sure. It was and it was, you know, it lived up.
Another Australian.
How about you, Fayssal?
Let's not unpack the meaning of that.
No. The Errol Flynn conversation, that's another time. Another series.
For me, it was just exciting to see a character of color with who was a refugee, who was three-dimensional and like a real human. It was I guess you'd never, in my career so far, when you get a script that involves a refugee, it's usually like, you know, they're used as a trope or something to lure the audience in, to tug at the heartstrings. But up to this day, there was never any real kind of substance behind the story you were telling. So when I first got this script, I looked at it and went, this is, I could connect to this on different levels. I could connect to it from immigrating to Australia myself when I was younger, seeing my father in EMEA. I could connect with it with friends I had growing up. I've done several plays that involved refugees in the early 2000s, where I went into Villawood Detention Centre, which was here to interview some of them, and just kind of being able to put a human face on something that usually gets lost in statistics was really important for me. And the passion that these three lovely people here that created the show had, and the story they wanted to tell, it was a no-brainer, really. I just had to learn diary. You know?
yes, in about 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
We gave you 3 weeks.
Yeah. 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Come on, you gotta get it done fast. And Yvonne, you may not have to. You had to learn some dance steps. Your character has quite a trajectory. From starting off, I believe one of the first shots is her as a flight attendant to where things end up for her. How did you feel about just that span of things that you were going to be playing?
Oh, that was, I mean, one of the things that really attracted me to the project was just the scope of what Sophie as a character covers, and the depth of her insides and her inner turmoil, and, in particular with her mental health, and as it declines when she's in the immigration center, and how that system fails her as it does pretty much everybody else in the show, and how we explore that. So, yeah, I mean, the dancing, the cult aspect, getting sucked into that, the lack of safety with the family, and just seemed like a big hurricane of things to really be able to sink my teeth into. And I also echo what Faze and Jai said about everything else that drew them to the project.
Yeah, I'm curious if that just as how that when you're acting in a project like this, how that weight kind of sits on you, because it's so intense. And of course the show is incredibly entertaining, and it's so well done and beautifully written and directed and produced and everything, but it's heavy. And did you feel a sense of responsibility as the storytellers on screen?
Look, absolutely. Especially in the detention center stuff, the majority of our background cast were at one stage in refugee camps or in detention centers in Australia or around the world, and meeting them and hearing how important it was to them to put a face on their story, to be represented. I mean, my first day on set, I was welcomed by the Afghan elders who held a little ceremony to welcome me and say they were humbled that I was the one representing their community. And every day I'd finish shooting a scene, someone would come up to me and say, "This happened to me. I went through this, like, where I didn't see my friend for this long." Everyone was connecting so much with this, and you realize the importance of the story we're telling, and the fact that it hadn't been told in this way, and the fact, thanks to the people involved, it was going to get a global audience. It's there's a lot of responsibility, but it's the good kind of responsibility. It's the kind that you want to get it right. You want to make sure people are proud of how you're representing them.
Can you all tell me a little bit about the decision to have the backgrounds artists to be refugees and be people who had been through, some of whom had been in detention centers?
We were very keen on the authenticity of our set, and our wonderful production designer, Melinda Doring, created really a replica desert detention centre that was, almost verbatim the way they really had been back in the early 2000s. And so we all felt really strongly that to feel that we knew, obviously there were hundreds and hundreds of people in these detention centres, so we knew we needed a lot of extras, but we also felt that the authenticity that we'd brought to the set design really needed to be reflected in who was in there, and that was very important to the whole series, to be truthful and not have people necessarily acting as detainees. So we shot in South Australia, so our wonderful casting agents basically put call-outs to people in South Australia in Port Augusta who were from the particular ethnicity that were held in detention in the early 2000s, asking if people would be interested. And there was an enormous response. Of course, we had to be very careful. There was a duty of care. There were many discussions around what it would mean, because people would walk into that set and feel instantly like they were in a detention centre. I mean, the authenticity, which Faye just talked about, was extraordinary, and people would really feel very upset often in that space, both actors and crew, because it just sort of had ghosts. But the background artists all came, and honestly, they, I can from the bottom of my heart say that they kind of really made the show. They were there. A lot of them moved to Port Augusta for a month, and every day just turned up and provided all of us crew cast with so much sustenance and stories, and it became a very reciprocal relationship, and there was a lot of friends were made on set.
Jai, what was that like for you then, playing a guard? I have to imagine, the detention center is, like you said, you all built that so this wasn't, that must have been, I don't know, like an upsetting feelings, even though you're playing this character.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's interesting. I got the chance to meet some people who had worked in facilities similar to the one we set up in the show, who had kind of varying experiences. One guy in particular was a really helpful resource, and I remained friendly with him and had shared a lot of the kind of journey that Cam does. Other people had really differing and quite unbelievable memories of their time there, and not in the way that you might expect. That I'm sure we'll talk about it later as well, but some of the history of the impact that it's had upon people that work in these systems has been devastating as well. And there were some individuals I spoke to who just had fond memories of their time there, and it was all great and good, and it was kind of conflicting because you have to get in touch with that as well. And I guess Cam, his intention in taking the position is not one of, he's not seeking a position of authority or trying to enforce anything in particular. I don't think his moral stance on borders is even that kind of fleshed out. It's really a personal decision for his own situation and his family. And I guess luckily, we explore that, particularly in the earlier episodes of the series. So kind of playing someone who's innately quite nurturing and caring and genuine with the detainees was kind of nice, because it wasn't this idea of this kind of mean figure there to kind of, and we explore that as well with some other characters, but I guess that helped in a way, because I didn't kind of have to detach too much from, I guess, where I sit with it. But yeah, it was pretty full on. And, without giving too much away, as things kind of start to deteriorate for everyone in the series, it definitely got a little harder. And it was kind of I mean, it's hard to deal with sometimes, man. There were people, like Fayssal said, background extras, people that came up. Not all of them knew exactly what the story was necessarily in its entirety. And I had guys come up to me and talk about, a particular guard I remind them of and how he was such a mean dude and this and that. And it was kind of weird because, we learn so much as actors to kind of have compassion for the characters we play and not kind of judge them. And I remember kind of feeling at that point really like, I don't know, I was kind of devastated for him and also devastated for the idea that even I, as my presence, whether it's my physicality or whatever, was reminding him of something that was really, really awful. And even in that moment, I wasn't there from a character standpoint. I could still represent that for him. And it was pretty tough at times to kind of, digest. But I don't know, in all of that, there was a beauty and a kind of learning and an understanding. And they were all having, even though there were days that were pretty full on for all of us, we were all having a great time making it, I think, because we had such belief in the storytelling and that helped.
Yeah, and one of the things I was so impressed with Cam's storyline was that when we first meet him, he's got his baby strapped to him. He wants to provide for his family, and this opportunity comes up. And as with all of the characters, as with Amir and Sophie, it's explored over and over. What is the line? What is the line that you will go up to and cross or not cross in order to get what you deem is worthy and important?
Mm. And I think that gets blurry, and that's the thing. That's what unravels people often, because we surprise ourselves with that,
For sure. Yvonne, tell me about, I know that you also had some really moving conversations with some of the background artists as well. How was that for you? Because Sophie is, like you said, she's got mental health issues. She's in some ways, she is there, but she also has this, she's hallucinating at times, and she has another reality at times that she is in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it was an incredibly powerful experience. And unlike pretty much any other project that I've ever been a part of, just having the very real experience on set with our background artists, as we're also talking about, really grounded it for me into just how real this was and what this story meant for everybody there, and that's why they were there because I too asked many people why they had come to in a way relive this experience, because our set was incredibly true to what was the real detention center, which happened to be up the road from where we were shooting. So yeah, it really was powerful. It's very hard to kind of talk about it without being moved all over again. So yeah, I mean, look, for me, it was a great learning experience outside of playing Sophie and this amazing character. It was a firsthand experience to learn about what it really means for families to be escaping a life and death situation and losing their family members, losing their kids, not knowing if their husbands and kids are alive or dead, and then ending up in a detention center where they're treated in a way like what our show explores. So yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
no, totally. Cate, I'm curious because you work with the United Nations with refugees. How did you feel like you wanted to pass along this massive knowledge that you have accumulated over your years doing this important humanitarian work to the cast and to the writing team and the directing team?
Well, if I'm completely honest, I started working with the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, as a global goodwill ambassador because I felt I couldn't tackle the notion of Australia's recent woeful treatment of refugees and asylum seekers head on. I felt it was so far off the national conversation that, and the conversation around it was so toxic that I felt that the only way to tackle it domestically in Australia was to deal with it internationally. And I think that sometimes that happens to all countries, that sometimes you can't hear a message until it's talked about overseas. There was so much shame and silence around it. But it all generated, for me, my desire to work with the UN was based on my shameful relationship to what was going on, under my watch, under all our watches, offshore in Australia. But I don't see drama as a place, as a political landscape. I'm not interested in telling an audience what to think, and nor am I interested in agitprop. I feel like drama is a place where you can deal with nuance and grey areas in a way when things become so toxic in public discourse or silent in public discourse. You can't make advances. You can't allow people to have a non-fear-based conversation. So I felt like, all of the stuff that I was, the experiences, the privileges that I was having, to meet refugees and asylum seekers, in urban settings internationally, but also in camps, I felt like that was something I could channel back into a dramatic scenario. So yeah, I think those two things were interlinked, but it certainly came, the desire to be involved in both those situations definitely came from what I had witnessed, being in Australia from the 90s onwards.
And let's talk about Pat for a second, because she is the tracksuited sequin dress.
I am bringing back parachute silk tracksuits. I've got a whole line. You wait.
I guess I want to hear what was in the coffee over breakfast, Elise and Kate, when you were deciding just everything about Pat.
We didn't get to Pat at the breakfast. Pat emerged a few years after that breakfast, or maybe a year after that breakfast. So, there was no hallucinogenics in the coffee that morning. That all came a little bit later when
in the costuming decisions.
Yeah, the wonderful Mary.
Tony and Elise and I talked about was obviously when you set about to make, at one point we were thinking, is this a film? And we thought, no, you need to live in a chapterized sense. You need to live the experience with these people. There's too much story to tell. You need to live with it over, it's a piece of television. And so we started talking about the seminal pieces of television that we had been inspired by. And the two that we kept returning to were Kieslowski's Decalogue, and also The Singing Detective, and the way that music and song was a conduit to memory, and we thought that was a great way in which Sophie could be haunted, because when people lose their marbles, when people descend into madness, when systems descend into madness, it's very difficult, as we're all experiencing right now, to connect with it. So we've realized that once Sophie got into the detention center, how could we use her perspective and her memory to highlight the situations that other people were experiencing? And we were really alive to that in the way that The Singing Detective had used song. So we then reverse engineered that into the cult. And obviously, and Elise, you speak so eloquently about this, but the way a cult is, the DNA of a cult is that it separates you from your past. It separates you and fractures your sense of identity. And what that we talked about a lot is that the Australia that we could see being touted internationally and who Australians were purporting to be was welcoming and easygoing, but yet we had this hard line border policy and really discombobulating and alienating relationships to the world's most vulnerable. And we thought, well, how do those two realities exist? Who are we as Australians? What is our cultural and national identity? And so a cult, which is all about that sort of that schism that happens in your identity. We felt that was a really great metaphor that that Pat in all her tracksuit of glory, and the wonderful Dominic West. I mean, how lucky were we? That could be alive in there. That metaphor could sit in a kind of a not too kind of in a wonderful way.
What said cult leader to you about Dominic West, or vice versa?
Well, cult leaders are very, to a T, are very charismatic, entity, and Dom is very, very charismatic. But what is so wonderful about him is that we had a conversation with him, and he was so alive to the subject matter and to the potential of the series that he didn't even need to see a script. Like he just wanted to be part of the endeavor. And I mean, all hail to everyone on this screen right now. I mean, I have never been part of a project where I felt that people have been so committed not only to their own character and to their storyline, but to the potential, to the conversation that the series would ignite. And I've been so proud to be part of, working with all of these extraordinary people.
It's so interesting that you talk about, I was just thinking about that earlier today, about the idea, just how that theme of identity and leaving your past behind, how obviously that is what a cult is. And I was thinking about a scene, Fayssal, that you were in, and literally the line is said when Amir's on he's going to the boat that will theoretically take him to asylum in Australia, and he's told, you can't hold on to the past. And when I saw that moment, I mean, I got chills, because it's devastating the way, and you see it you see it with Cam, you certainly see it with Sophie and with Amir, how you need to figure out who is your identity, and how much do you look forward, and how much do you look back, and how much do you try and just survive in the present.
Yeah, and I think you also see it in Claire Asher's character as well, trying to discover who she is in this world that she doesn't necessarily want to be in. But in regards to Amir and that specific scene, it was a moment of saying goodbye to your previous life in the hopes of achieving something new, and it's that risk that refugees take with every life-threatening decision they have to take to look for a better life. But I think that's the strength of this series, that each of these characters are basically looking for the same thing. They're looking for a better life. They're looking for a safe life. And it's really important and interesting how it's told and woven together in different ways.
Yeah, another theme obviously is how power can corrupt. Certainly. You might be seeing that going on.
Can it? Really?
And just how power can allow one party to dehumanize another. I guess Elise and Tony and Kate, maybe you can talk a little bit about that theme, because I that certainly runs through the whole series.
Elise?
Tony. Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was still thinking about the poetic resonances with the identity, so my mind was there.
You can talk about identity too.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say to that. I was just going to say, picking up from what Fayssal was saying, what you were asking earlier, and Kate was talking about in the long research too, the resonances between the cult and what a refugee in an Australian system anyway. I can't talk for other systems because I didn't research them as thoroughly, but this idea, and you see it in Ep 2 with Faysal's character when he's basically disbelieved in that interview, and that every single thing he says is questioned and queried. And I read a lot of these interviews, and they were not dissimilar to the way, Dominic and Cate are breaking Sophie down. And it's this sense that then what is the past, and is your past real? And what happens if you then start to doubt it because you're broken down so much, which can happen, which does obviously happen to Sophie, but the resonances also with refugees that are put through these endless interviews where they're already often coming from places of trauma, instability, and are then put into these situations where they're disbelieved. And so at the end of that, when you're couple that with years often of confinement, do you start to lose the sense of who you are? And so a lot of those resonances in the research started to become really clear between, there's a lot of questions here on the chat about why Sophie, why the white woman. But for us, there were just so many resonances in this story. Of course, she's more literally a Trojan horse to get people into the series, but also there were beautiful resonances about her passport's taken from her. She can't escape. Her past is removed because in a cult sense that's what has to happen for her to move forward. Whereas for Fayssal, for Amir's character, he has to actually give up his own kind of history, but then to come to a new place, throw his passport away, the people smugglers say. So there were all these, and then he goes through these endless interviews of who are you? Where did you come from? When did you leave? On what date did you leave? And, it's this breaking down of identity. And I think that for all of us became a really, really strong thematic for the show of who are you? And it could be any of us.
Which is why the title Stateless, because it is about the distethering of people's sense of who they are, rather than people literally being stateless in the technical term. I also feel like it was really important for us when we were talking about powers and systems and things like that to try to represent the perspective of someone from the working class in this as well, because often in those discussions about identity and politics, we actually forget that characters like Jai's character, who come from a financially disadvantaged situation, and they also have all kinds of forms of oppression which lead them into an oppressive system. So there's a kind of co-option of the working class in the whole system, which I think that sometimes we can other those characters as well. And what happens then is that in your discussions about the world, you're not recognizing the disadvantages of a very disadvantaged group of people.
But it's also, Yvonne and I were just talking about this earlier today, is that it's shocking that it took the experience of a white Australian woman being mistakenly placed into a very dysfunctional onshore immigration detention centre in order to draw attention to it. And I think that's interesting in and of itself. And the way we used that potential quote unquote power as Elise was saying, as a Trojan horse to bring people into the series. So if you stick with the series, you see that there's a multifarious nature of perspectives, but we've hopefully ambushed a less likely quotient of the potential audience to invite them in to an array of perspectives.
I think it is disheartening and infuriating. That yes, the people started paying international attention, like you said, because this white woman had been detained. I think back to this scene where Amir he sees people and another detainee said, "Why are you here?" He said, "Well, we're all terrorists. It's because people look and if you have brown skin, you're a terrorist." And then that general feeling, it's like the white woman could stand on her own and have her singular story. And yet, if you are a refugee for Afghanistan, you are part of this collective group that is dehumanized.
Yeah. And in a way, the series, we were mirroring what happened, ideally mirroring what happened in the news back in 2004, which was, oh my God, a white woman. Now we suddenly want to look at this. And, our plan, our hope for the series was, okay, if we can't get a series up about the refugee experience because it's difficult subject matter, then this may have the same effect, that the series in a way can do what happened back in 2004, which was suddenly everyone going, oh my God, let's look at this issue. And so that was definitely in our thoughts in terms of how to get eyes and minds and hearts onto these issues in a similar way to what happened in reality.
Yeah, and we're in no way saying that is okay. I mean, I think what our massive hope with the series is this isn't a closed chapter. And unfortunately, as you suggested earlier on in the conversation, it took a long time to get the series up. And if I'm perfectly honest, as the years went by, we thought, well, maybe it's not relevant anymore. And unfortunately, it just became increasingly more important we felt to tell the story. This problem hasn't gone away. The issue hasn't been dealt with. The global displacement crisis has only got worse. The xenophobic language in terms of immigration policy has been exported globally. It's not. This conversation isn't over, but we're not going to get anywhere if we compound the notion of shame and fear-based conversation. We have to invite everyone into the table so that we can have a collective conversation about what are we going to do about this? How do we feel about this? What happens to our national identity, to our humanity when we allow these things to go on? The series is the beginning. It's not the end.
Absolutely.
I think.
Of course, and it does feel, the number of conversations that I think people who finish, you watch Stateless, and then I feel like, I know, like I was online nonstop afterwards and talking to people, and it is certainly so thought-provoking. Was it hard to get this made?
Yes. yes.
It's a painful memory, right?
Yeah. Two of commercial TV's favorite subjects: mental health and refugees. Imagine going into a commissioner and saying, "Hey, we've got this great idea."
Yeah, when you hear the word brave in a conversation, you went, "No, this is not going anywhere."
Yeah. No, it was really tough, and and fortunately we had Kate's commitment and incredible cast to also help us, give it some legitimacy in commercial eyes, but it took a long time to find the right combination of partners and cast to kind of make it happen, and still quite a lot of pleading as well.
Doesn't that say something though about our society? You guys had such a rough time with this, and yet right now it's making such an impact with everybody because it's so timely and so important. And yes, it should be noted that it did take a white Australian woman for Australia to pay attention to something like this, especially to a character like what Faye presents with Amir, and that one character representing the 80 million people who are truly displaced across the world. So it's definitely not lost on me that that's what we're sitting. That these are the characters we represented. That I am the white Australian woman that was used as the Trojan horse to enter into this story, and I think it's really valid to just talk about that.
Certainly, it's certainly important to point out. I know that it was hard getting it made, but I have to say, I am grateful that it came out now, because like Yvonne just said, it feels eerily relevant. Obviously, there are many years that this could have felt relevant, and yet something about the time that we find ourselves in right now, where there seems to be, a tremendous amount of xenophobia and bigotry, and coming to terms with or acknowledging bigotry. It feels incredibly timely right now. Did you all feel that way?
I think also, yes, and the humanity that the show is inspiring as well. We're going back to our humanity in this show. And the fact that we are in a pandemic, and Kate, you brought this up earlier as well, and how some people are not able to see their families right now because of a pandemic. And I think that that is really also one of the things that is really part of probably why it's powerfully impacting some people, because that's one of the elements of the show, is people being separated from family.
And also, I think what we're all living with is the notion of an indefinite future. And that's something that Elise's painstaking research showed, and certainly I've experienced in meeting refugees in the field, is that it's not being able to know what's going to happen a year from now. And I'm not talking about, massive shifts. I'm just talking about, can my kids go to school? They're all things that on a very base level we're all struggling with, just the day-to-day. And that's what refugees live with for, upwards of 19, 20 years, that level of uncertainty. And it is maddening. And so people who have escaped incredible privation and danger, gone through arduous journeys, and to exercise their basic human rights, which is to seek asylum or refuge when they're fleeing persecution, and then they're criminalized and put into indefinite detention. In a way, the base trauma happens when indefinite detention begins. And I think that level of, to greater or lesser degree, we're dealing with massive uncertainty. So I think that audiences perhaps are more alive to that experience perhaps right now.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go to, we have so many amazing questions. And I just want to say, thank you to everyone who is here from all over the world. People are writing in what country they're in. And it's, I love how.
Oh, really?
Yes. I mean, truly, I feel like maybe not Antarctica, but everywhere else. Which is wonderful. I want to ask some questions. Let's start with Nicola from the United States. She wanted to know, what is the impact strategy for this series and how you plan to advocate for the stateless and raise awareness, and how can people help?
Kate, do you want to talk about?
Well, we should probably just from the get-go be very clear about the title of Stateless, and what statelessness actually is. Because statelessness is a condition, it's a legal term to describe a condition of people who are citizens of nowhere. So they don't have any legal identity, which means that their human rights are fundamentally curtailed. So they don't have access to an education, ongoing education. Their travel is curtailed. Their access to medical care is curtailed. And this is a generational problem. And it's very difficult to identify how many stateless people there are in the world, because they're literally invisible. And so we use that notion of invisibility and people's being estranged from their ability to forge an identity and a connection to their past and ability to create a future. And that's where we use the title of statelessness, of Stateless in our series.
And as far as what people can do, I mean, there's a lot of questions from people. What can you do? I mean, someone said that she feels like calls and letters and protests have become meaningless in the face of the administration. I assume she's referring to the American administration's policies. And is what do you think is an effective way to advocate and create meaningful change?
Personally, I mean, I think the basic thing you can do if you live in a vaguely functioning democracy is you can vote.
What's that like?
You can, I don't know, but you can vote. And in some areas, it may take you hours and hours and hours to stand in line. And people's ability to vote is being very challenged right now. But it is your democratic right to vote, and you need to exercise that right to vote. Democracy is more fragile, I think, than any of us could possibly imagine. And so I think that's the first port of call. But the other thing is, I think that there are very, I'm not on social media, but I know that there can be a lot of anger and xenophobic conversation that goes on in social media. Challenge that, and if you encounter any of that, stand up to it. And if you encounter, I mean, it's like, I've got a daughter who's, we adopted a little girl, and all of a sudden, all of these people I didn't realize who had been adopted suddenly said, I was adopted. And I think it's a little bit like that with the refugee experience, is that we all know people who are descendants of refugees, who are refugees themselves. Welcome them into your circle, welcome their stories into your circle, disseminate their experience, that there's ways in which we can use our voice to build communities in a positive way, and also celebrate the incredibly powerful, positive contributions that refugees have made, in their host communities, and I know that's, I look at Australia that I grew up in, and there have been amazing positive contributions, and that they have been making us medical workers, frontline workers. They've kept a lot of food programs going in Portugal, that they're amazingly resilient, resourceful, hopeful, optimistic set of people, who've been demonized. So challenge that and celebrate that. I think it's something we can do that's a kind of a simple linguistic and social thing that we can do.
I'm so confused why you're not on social media. It's such a hopeful and supportive community page.
It's all yours. You have it.
I'm curious what the conversations you all have had, either with family or friends or fans or people that have reached out to you, where there were specific moments of scenes that really touched people you knew, or moments that angered them, or what seems to be the thing that has resonated that you have heard about?
I don't know. One thing I think is interesting is, this sense of like this Aussie, the confusion around us kind of having things worked out all the time, which has been interesting, because even though our series takes place some time ago, I think there's a sense that our system is like really progressive and taking care of everybody sometimes. And that's been an interesting thing to talk about with some people, because we don't always know what's going on. And like, that's fair to say. Some of my friends in Oz wouldn't have any idea how bad it is on the border of Mexico here, and how children are being locked in cages in the United States, and, deprived of basic human rights. And so, I don't know, having some discussion around that as a surprise has kind of been interesting. And I think we deal with that, it's tough to kind of, I must say, even we are still in the dark about a lot of what's going on. The fact that, the visibility issue around what we can get access to and what journalists can get access to, and what the public can be aware of in our current system is pretty interesting, because it's really easy to sweep these issues under the rug, and the less visibility we have, the less conversation there is, and the less we care, because it doesn't concern us and it's not in our face. So I don't know, there's been some interesting chats around that sort of stuff, and with people surprised to learn how bad it is, and even not being able to fully educate them on how bad it possibly can be, because I don't know either,
How about you, Fayssal?
Look, I have gotten a lot of people messaging on Instagram and Facebook and stuff, sharing their stories and being comfortable enough to have connected with the story and be comfortable enough to then share their views. I've had lots of people asking how they can help. I generally direct them to centres and things in Australia. But overwhelmingly, it's been positive that it's been a topic that's been tackled, because people don't know. People hadn't realised Australia was like this. There are about 47 asylum seekers in a Melbourne hotel at the moment that are, kind of living through COVID at the same time and dealing with this. I've been in contact with some of them, trying to help them in their process. Some have been stuck for 7 years. It's generated a lot of positive conversation that hopefully will lead to some reform, some change. But that's not going to happen unless people actively engage with, elected representatives about wanting change. But yeah, I think it's generally just been so positive. It's and humbling to know that you've had that kind of experience, you've had that kind of impact on someone, and people are comfortable enough to now share their experiences, but also be encouraged to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And did you happen to hear? I don't know if you stayed in touch, but I think it's so moving that on the set that these Afghan elders, told you that they had what you had said earlier, that they were proud that you were representing. I think that's so beautiful. Did you ever hear from anyone that you met there?
Yeah, I still chat a lot with them. Ahmed Hadari, who was Soraya, who played Mina, my eldest daughter, he was my dialect coach. So we're still in contact. And it was Soraya's 17th birthday last week. I remember we were filming on her 16th birthday. So yeah, it's nice to stay connected with the community down there in South Australia. They're beautiful people, and from what they tell me, they're very proud of the way we represented a part of their story.
Yeah, that's so important. How about you, Yvonne? What has been the thing that people, I think people who knew the story of Cornelia Rao maybe so closely identified what happened with Sophie with her story, but was there anything in particular that stood out as people would talk about the show with you?
I think it's just sort of been mainly people being incredibly moved by all the performances on the show and what the show talks about, and also people not realizing that we have detention centres in Australia. So that's a lot of, it's like what we were talking about earlier. As a country, it's very sort of painted as multicultural, open arms kind of situation. And I think a lot of people are incredibly unaware that this is actually still going on. So that's great that people are realizing.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what's going on? Because this is set in the 2000s, and things are different now in Australia than they were when this is set. What is the situation now with detention centres in Australia?
Well, when this case of the white woman sort of came to everyone's attention, there was real hope and belief that things would change. And in the mid-2000s, a lot of those desert camps did shut down. But what had happened governmentally was that boats were being turned back. So if a boat was intercepted, it was sent back to Indonesia or wherever it had come from with asylum seekers. That was then changed a few years later with a different Prime Minister. But as I said earlier, in 2013, it became if you arrive in Australia by boat, you will never settle here. And so then the era of the offshore detention started, even though it had been earlier, but it became the only detention for newly arrived refugees. And so that was the period that Cate and I and Tony started talking about the show, and that was Manus and Nauru and the men from Manus and Nauru. Fayssal just mentioned the men in the hotel have all come from those islands for medical treatment to Australia. And so the situation actually is far worse than it was in the period that we show. So unfortunately, we'd like to say that things changed for the better after this period of Stateless, but no, they significantly deteriorated.
Do you all, I'm curious, I'm going to ask the actors first and then the producers, because I'm curious and you might have totally different answers. What do you think happened to your characters?
Look, okay, I'll jump in because I get asked this a lot. I think the sad truth is there's only two avenues for Amir moving forward, and that would be offshore detention or he would have been returned to Afghanistan. So I don't think there's a happy ending there for Amir.
What about Cam? What about Sophie?
I think because of the neglect, I guess, that Sophie went through with regards to her mental health in the detention centre. I think at the end, what we see in the series is how lost she has become within her own self, and how she's sort of she's not there anymore. The spirit, the free spirit that I sort of saw her as at the beginning of the show has undergone such a transformation that she's sort of living in an alternate reality for herself. And I just don't think for Sophie that there was any kind of going back from that. It was important for me in that very, very last scene to convey kind of a death of spirit. I think that's the only way I can put it. And I think there's not a happy ending there either in that world.
How about Cam?
I reckon Cam left that place haunted by, what he saw, what he witnessed, what he was forced to do, what he did, what he was capable of. And I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think it went pretty simply for him. I think he fell back into the lifestyle he knew, and I don't know. Maybe move towns. I would buy that if he could to get away from that. I don't think he was necessarily someone who was going to be a great sort of mechanism for change or whatever. But I think he probably just backed back into the world that he felt was safe for him.
And I would assume with so much more knowledge, which of course informs then everything. Kate, what happened to Pat?
Pat?
Yes.
I can answer that. She's doing a lounge act on the Diamond Princess.
No, that's me. I've got the Diamond Princess contract. Elise always talked about Pat as being kind of a symbol for Australia. This incredible welcome embrace that turned icy. But I think for better or for worse, Pat is continuing to sing and dance in an increasingly hollow way.
We're just going to ask a couple other questions, but I think this is such an interesting question, certainly in light of the conversations that are going on about dismantling problematic systems. And one of these questions is, can you, with common threads of oppression, this is from Giovanna, with common threads of oppression and isolation among detention systems globally, can they be fixed without being dismantled?
I don't know what dismantling actually means. I guess I just don't understand the question, because, people there's no country in the world that advocates open borders, as far as I understand. So that we have to work out. Every country has to work out its relationship to its border policy, and presumably that is the system. So, is dismantling the system? I don't know.
I would say to halt privatising the system would be something that I would personally think is critical to this system becoming humane. And I think you see it in Stateless, but the privatisation of the company that runs these centres, which has been definitely in Australia really from the early 2000s on and still was going in mass and Nauru, a lot of the loss of humanity and the bottom dollar kind of operation of these centres really dehumanised those in them. So yes, I agree. With Tony, you can't. There's always going to have to be a system, but how do you make that system humane and living up to our obligations under the UN Convention, which we're signatories to? And I think privatising it goes utterly against that. And we've seen that over and over in Australia, how corrupt that potentially becomes.
Yes, it's when these systems that are based on human rights, or should be based on human rights, fundamental access to human rights, become monetarized and turn into businesses. And I think you see that in the US. and certain prison systems within Australia and Western Australia that have been privatised, that there's no sense that the prison systems are trying to rehabilitate people. It's simply about filling beds in a way. And so therefore, when you're dealing with really vulnerable people who are fleeing from trauma, you have a duty of care to deal with that trauma and to try and pave a way to their repatriation or safe return home, which of course is what all refugees want. But it's not safe. They're not fleeing a safe environment. They're fleeing trauma. And so we have every country has a duty of care. This is the global displacement crisis is just that. It's global. Like the climate crisis is global. The pandemic is global. And it can only be solved in a global way. It can't be solved if we monetarize those systems and put up arbitrary borders and say, thou shalt not cross, because it could be you, it could be me next time.
Maybe part of the answer is for us to find ways to depoliticize the humanitarian issues, so that like in Australia, what happened was that the refugee question at a certain point in political history became suddenly something that was could lose an election. So both major political parties suddenly had to be tough on refugees because it became a political issue rather than a humanitarian issue. And maybe if we can find ways to sort of separate that, but that actually has to happen in amongst the general public. So it's things like shows like Stateless that can humanize the refugee experience. That might be part of a solution, a part of a way of getting us all to not see refugees as a threatening other who are going to take away from our humanity, but actually can contribute to our humanity. Maybe that's part of a solution.
Last question, is there going to be another season, not necessarily about these characters, but just stories of, or maybe about these characters, but stories of other people, of other refugees? I mean, I know how easy this one was to get made, so.
yeah,
yeah, and of course, not all refugees are stateless. And just to reiterate too, that the series is not about statelessness. And that's the thing too, is that no one series can speak to all of the experience. We've said it before, this is just the beginning of the conversation, and we hope that many more, unexpected and perhaps hitherto hidden stories can be discussed in drama, because, this is not a catch-all. This is just, one example of one particular moment in time in one particular region.
Absolutely. I would encourage everyone, if you want to donate to the UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees. And Cate, what you just said is so spot on. I think this show, Stateless, it's streaming now on Netflix. It's extraordinary. And you watch it and it's just the beginning of the conversation and the beginning of ways to educate yourself. I want to thank you all so much, to this incredible audience, and to Tony and Fayssal and Elise and Yvonne and Jai and Cate. I thank you so much for joining me for this wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us,
Jessica.
Thanks. You have a good night, everyone. Stay safe. Wear your mask.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye. Everyone. Bye.
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 I don't know how to log off these, so.
No.